Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Pekudei. Unusual that it's on its own, it's not doubled up with Vayakel as well. It's an opportunity to look at this Parsha alone, and we don't have to go further than the first pasuk. The first pasuk says, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdus. Asher pukad al pi Moshe, avodas halavim bi'adisom ben Aaron HaKohen. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. These are the reckonings of the Mishkan. Mishkan HaEdus, the tabernacle of testimony, the article translated as Asher pukad al pi Moshe, which were reckoned by Moshe Rabbeinu, avodas halavim bi'adisom ben Aaron HaKohen. Now, Rashi focuses on the word, the double expression of Mishkan in the opening pasuk. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. These are the reckonings of the Mishkan. Mishkan HaEdus, the Mishkan of Edus, of testimony. Why repeat the word Mishkan? So Rashi picks up on it and says, Shnei Pa'amim, HaMishkan Mishkan, Shnei Pa'amim, Remez L'Migdosh. It's a hint, an allusion to the Beis HaMikdash, Shenismashkein b'shnei churbanin she'al avonosein shel Yisrael, which was used as a security, a mashkein, a collateral, for the two churbans, for the sins of Klal Yisrael. That means that rather than HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroying the Jewish people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu therefore took away the collateral when Klal Yisrael fell short. Mishkan HaEdus, Edus Yisrael, says Rashi. And if you're listening online and you want the handout, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. This is the second box, the Rashi on the pasuk. Edus Yisrael, shevite lohem HaKadosh Baruch Hu al ma'aseh ha'egel. This was testimony. This was a testimony from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he had forgiven Klal Yisrael for the sin of the Egel HaZahav. Shari hishra shchinasa b'neim, because once again his Shechina descended and dwelt amongst the Jewish people. I came across a very beautiful idea in the Sefer Talei Oros, quoting someone called Rabbi David Jungreis, and he addresses an issue which we've discussed in Parsha before in a different context, but I thought it would be very interesting to start with this because it gives a different answer that we've said in the past. Says Rabbi David Jungreis, this is in the third box on the handout, quoting from his brought in the Sefer Talei Oros. Omeres HaGemara. The Gemara says, the Gemara Yuma Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, B'shah shenichnasu ovim lehechel. When the enemy came into the temple, Motzu HaKruvim urin zeh b'zeh. They found that the Kruvim were embracing. The two Kruvim on top of the Aron HaKodesh were embracing each other. V'niskashu HaRishonim b'divrei HaGemara, and the Rishonim struggle with this because the Gemara says in Babasra Daf Tzadi Tes Amud Aleph, Shebizman she'ein Yisrael osim ritzonu shemokum lo haya pneim ish el ochiv. That the Kruvim were not facing each other. So how come at a time when the enemies, at the time of the Churban, when they came into the Beis HaMikdash, into the Kodesh Kedoshim, they found the Kruvim embracing each other? That seems to go against the Gemara in Baba Basra, which says when we're not doing the Ratzon Hashem, i.e. at the time of the Churban, that they would face away from each other. So how do you deal with that? How come, therefore, the Kruvim, these angel-like cherubs were on top of the Aron, how come they were embracing? Next paragraph. B'Sefer Parshas Tzorachim Nebal Mishnah Lemelech. The Mishnah Lemelech in his Sefer Parshas Tzorachim, Hevi b'Shem Chachmei Ashkenaz Letaris. He brings the Chachmei Ashkenaz to answer as follows. She'remez b'zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She'bechurban ha'etzim va'avonim nischap l'avonosem shel Yisrael. At the time of Churban, of the destruction of the first and the second Beis HaMikdash, the very stones and the very wood, the edifice of the Beis HaMikdash, they actually were the kapara, the atonement for the Jewish people, for the sins of the Jewish people. So you see at the time of the Churban, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose not to destroy the Jewish people, but instead destroyed the building, the wood, the bricks, the stone. And therefore that itself was a sign of divine love for Klal Yisrael. And therefore, when they came in, of course, to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Kodesh Kedoshim, they see the cherubs, the Kruvim, embracing each other. That was a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loved Klal Yisrael because he chose not to destroy Klal Yisrael, but instead to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, at that moment, it was a time of Shechina Shereb Yisrael, a time of love, even though leading up to it, no doubt, it was a time of divine displeasure. Nevertheless, at that moment, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt that it was appropriate to destroy the Beis HaMikdash, he chose to destroy the Beis HaMikdash and not Klal Yisrael. Next paragraph. And with this, we can explain a pasuk in Shiur HaShirim in the first parak in Pasuk Yud Gimel, Tzurur Hamar Doidi Li. Tzurur Hamar Doidi Li. Myrrh is a type of incense. In English, you translate it as myrrh. It's a funny spelling, M-Y-R-R-H. A bundle of myrrh, Tzurur Hamar Doidi Li, is beloved to me. Bein Shodai Yolin, between my breasts he will lie. says the Tali Oris. V'omru al zeh b'medrash, and the medrash says, B'shah she'atam meitzeh u'meimali, at the time when you, Klal Yisrael, are causing me trouble and difficulty and upset, atanas doideli, you become close to me. Ach lefi zeh, so that's how it explains the pasuk. Ach lefi zeh mapshar shel hemshech pasuk bein shodai yolin. I can understand, Shur Hamar Doidili, that at a time of love you actually cause distress to me. But how does that explain the second half of the pasuk of Bein Shodai Yolin, of between my breasts he shall lie? What does that mean? Says the Talieris, El HaKavona Shebeshas HaChurban. At the time of the Churban, Shor She'atameitzu Omeima, at a time where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is displeased with Klal Yisrael, is being tormented, upset by Klal Yisrael. Ozna sedoidili. That's when Dafka Klal Yisrael, a beloved HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shemischaprin avunasein shel Yisrael al yedei HaChurban. That actually, it's a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroys the Beis Hamikdash and not Klal Yisrael, is a sign of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love for us. V'dova zeh af nirmaz ba'ofen hamidas hakruvim, and that finds expression in the position of the kruvim. Shegam b'shas hachurban ben shodai yolin. Even at the time of Churban, Bein Shodai Yolin, Hoisa Shechina Shor B'Yisrael. That's an expression of the Shechina, the divine presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu residing with Klal Yisrael. V'zeh Pirush HaKosov Mishkan Ha'idus. And that explains the opening pasuk in this week's Sedra. Ele Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan Ha'idus, Shegam B'shah Shnismashken HaMishkan. Even when the Mishkan was used, i.e. the Beis HaMikdash was used as a collateral for security for the sins of Klal Yisrael, Beis HaChurban, Hoisa Edus. That itself was testimony. The what? Sha'ashchina Shur B'Yisrael, al yidei oifen hamidas hakruvim. That itself was a sign that the Shechina was residing amongst Klal Yisrael because of the way the kruvim were found, embracing each other. Shoyi pneim ish el ochiv. So you see, therefore, that Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan Edus, the Mishkan Edus was, the testimony was, that the kruvim were embracing each other. That itself, if you like, was proof, was edus, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves Klal Yisrael because he chose ultimately to destroy the Beis HaMikdash and not Klal Yisrael itself. And that answers the kasha why they were dafka embracing at the time when the Oivim, the enemies, came into the Kodesh Kedoshim. Okay, let's move on. The second idea is actually on the same pasuk, and it's a very beautiful idea I saw in the writings of Rabbi Zalman Sorotsky in the Oznaim La Torah, one of the great Gedolim of the sort of the second half of the 20th century, who lived in Eretz Yisrael from Eastern Europe originally, and then moved to Eretz Yisrael. He was the head of the Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah in the 1960s, I think, and that sort of time. Says the pasuk, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdus. Like I said just earlier, these are the reckonings of the Mishkan, the tabernacle of testimony, Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe, that was reckoned by Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Medrash, a very interesting Medrash, Shmos Rabbah. Lama also imoim cheshbon. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to do a cheshbon? He had to reckon, he had to sort of account for every single piece of gold and every money that came into the Mishkan. Moshe Rabbeinu had to account and show Klal Yisrael where it came from. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yisbarach shemoy ma'aminay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu believes Moshe Rabbeinu. Shene'emar lo yichein avdi Moshe b'chol beisi ne'emanhu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself says that Moshe Rabbeinu is very trustworthy. You know why Moshe Rabbeinu was forced, as it were, to do a reckoning? Because the Leitzonei Yisrael, the scoffers, the mockers in the Jewish people, were talking about Moshe Rabbeinu behind his back. The pasuk says in Shmos Lamed Gimel, this is in last week in Parsha Kisisa, that they were looking at Moshe. What does that mean? So the Gemara, the Medrash says, Rabbi Chama Omer, Hayu Oimrim, Klal Yisrael. It sounds astonishing to say, but this is what they were saying. Hayu Oimrim, Chame Kadal Debrei da Amram. Look at the nape of the neck of Ben Amram. Ben Amram is, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu, but it's a disparaging term. We don't want to call him by his own name. We call him the son of Amram. Look at the thickness of his neck. What do you expect? so much money has come through his hands, millions and millions of pounds of dollars have gone through his hands to collect for the Mishkan, to build the Mishkan. He's a wealthy man, and therefore he's perhaps has siphoned off some of that money to use for his own benefit, and that's why the nape of his neck is large. When Moshe Rabbeinu heard that people were saying this about him, he said the following: Nigmar Mishkan, when the Mishkan is complete, I will give you an accounting how every single penny was used properly. So now the Mishkan has been built. Our Sedra begins Ve'ele Pekudei HaMishkan. Atkan the Medrash. Says the Oznaim LaTorah, a very interesting insight, that when it comes to the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu has to give an exact accounting how every dime, how every penny was spent. But when it comes to the Egel, where also people had given money, there was no accounting over there. Why the difference? Says Rabbi Soroskin, of all the zahav that was collected, this little calf came out. Not even a large cow, a large ox. It was a calf, egel. And they didn't require a cheshbon. So how come when it came to the Mishkan, where you see this enormous building with all the kelim, there Moshe had to give a reckoning, but when it came to the egel, a little calf comes out of all the gold that was donated, and yet there's no requirement, no demand for a reckoning, for a cheshbon. Why? Says the Oznaim LaTorah. This is the second paragraph in the bottom box of the page. This midah is still within the Jewish heart. When it comes to the Gabbai Tzedakah, who's collecting for holy causes, he's got to give a cheshbon, an exact cheshbon. Quote unquote. But when money is collected for less noble causes, let's say, people don't really require the same exactitude. Why? And perhaps I can suggest the following, says the Rabbi Soroskin. The very kernel, the very root of the heart of a Jew, the real rotzen, the real desire of every single Jew, is to do the will of Hashem. Ultimately, we have the Pintaliyid, you have we're all made up of the body and the soul. We're all parts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every one of us has a neshama which longs to cleave to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like the Rambam says in Hilchos Gerushin, when he gives the explanation there, and he quotes it in the brackets here in Hilchos Gerushin, Perek Beis Halacha Chof, that v'get mu'usa. Rahman is if a man has to give a get to his wife, and he's resisting doing it under certain circumstances, you can put a bit of pressure on him. And even if you're hitting him to give the get, and he goes, okay, I'll give it. But you can't give a get at Balkarchai. You can't give a get against his will. And yet, this is a valid get if it's done in the correct way. So how can that be? So the Rambam explains, because deep down, that's his rotzen. Deep down, he wants to do good. It's just that the Yetzer Hara is covering up the deep rotzen of the person. The mashal I always give is that imagine you've got a piece of metal and you've got a magnet. Then it's a strong pull, and the magnet and the metal will connect to each other, and you can't pull away the metal from the magnet. It's hard. But if you take the magnet and you sort of wrap it with cotton wool and with sawdust and with paper, and the more you wrap it, the less the pull of the metal to the magnet. Well, so to us, we have an neshama which wants to do the right thing, and yet sometimes we get caught up with bad midas and with Yetzer Hara and with distractions, and that takes away the pull. But deep down, we want to do the right thing. Continues the Oznaim LaTorah, but if a person wants to give money for a good cause, the Mishkan, or for any other good cause, the person wants that every penny that he gives goes to this lofty, holy cause. Because ultimately it'll be a big zuchus for him. But when the Yetzer Hara entices a person to give to a less noble cause, to some other egel cause, his deep-rooted nefesh is actually lamenting that choice. al she'oval rutzoin koinai, that he's going against the will of Hashem. And therefore, he's less bothered. You take it, you siphon a little bit off yourself, and you keep some for yourself. No. In a way, deep down, his subconscious neshama is actually quite happy with that. That it will actually reduce the nonsense that this money is being used for. And therefore, it will be less of an avera for him. So, interesting observation when it comes to the collection of the Mishkan, that a reckoning had to be done by Moshe Rabbeinu. Why, as the Medrash says? Because the late Tzonei Yisrael, the Jewish late Tzonim, mockers, were saying, Moshe Rabbeinu, he looks like he's siphoned some of the money. And so Moshe Rabbeinu says he'll do a reckoning. Why dafka here does he do the reckoning? When it comes to other less noble causes, the Egel, etc., he doesn't do a reckoning. The Teretz says the Pnimis of a Yid wants every single penny for a good cause to be used properly as a zuchus for him. But deep down he knows when money is collected for less altruistic and noble causes, he doesn't really mind so much. And therefore, on the contrary, it's better that money is not used for this less positive cause. Okay, moving on, turning over the page. There's a famous vod, we once said this before, but we're on the same pasuk, and it's hard not to mention. It's a very beautiful idea of Rav Moshe Feinstein on this opening pasuk. Eile Pekudei Mishkan Mishkan Ha'idus. Says Rav Moshe, this is from the Drash Moshe. Eile Pekudei Nira. She'etzem ha'cheshbon hu lahirus. The ultimate reckoning is to show. She'tzorich ha'adam lasus cheshbon al kol dava she'nosan Hashem yisbarach. That every person has to do a cheshbon, a reckoning, on everything that Hashem has given us. Bein al zman ha'chaim, whether it's your time, how we've used the time HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. What has a person done with the time given to him by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Time is the greatest gift. Has he used that time productively for Torah, for mitzvahs, or he's wasted it? If I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, when his sons became bar mitzvah, he bought them a present. What present do you think Rabbi Yaakov would give his children? You imagine a nice sefer. A Mishnayos, maybe a Gemara, maybe a K'tzos, maybe his own sefer, Emes Liyaakov. But Rabbi Yaakov gave his boys at their bar mitzvah a different present. He gave them a watch. Why a watch? Because he was trying to impart to his children that the most precious gift HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave is the gift of time. And really the trick of life is to use it well. And therefore, when a person needs to do a reckoning, his reckoning is, has he used his time well? Bein al shefa ha'parnasa, but not only time, every gift that Hashem has given us. So too with shefa ha'parnasa, if a person is blessed with money, how has he used that money which Hashem gave him? Ma'osa b'mamonai, va'af halat tzedakah, even when it comes to charity. Eze inyonei tzedakah also, what type of tzedakah did he give? Person can't just do what he wants with the things that Hashem gave him. Because after all, there are lots of halachas about how we should use our money. You can't just waste money. And when it came in Eretz Yisrael, when the time of the Yovel, that when Yovel was operative, the land came back, you had to make a full reckoning, a full accounting. And therefore, Pekudei Mishkan Ha'idus Asher Tziva Hashem, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, it's alluding to the ultimate cheshbon that every one of us needs to make, whether or not we're using the gifts, the opportunities, the time that Hashem has given us in the most productive way possible. Okay, let's just finish off with one final idea. This Shabbos is Shabbos Mevarchin. It's Rosh Chodesh Nisan coming up, Mitzvah Hashem next week. And therefore, the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, we always make a special, add the special tefillah straight after Kriyas HaTorah. We call it Mevarchin HaChodesh. And it's based on a Gemara in Brachos Daf Tes Zayin. If you look at the paragraph 4a, the Gemara in Brachos Tes Zayin al Beis says the following: Rav Bosat Sluse Omahachi. After Rav finished davening, he would say the following, and this is after his regular Shemona Esrei. This is nothing to do with the Rosh Chodesh or Mevorach HaChodesh. This was Rav on a regular occasion, I don't know how often, presumably daily, would say the following: Yirozman Fanecha Hashem Elokeinu, Shetitzen Lanu Chaim Aruchim. You should give us, you Hashem, please, should give us a long life, Chaim Shel Shalom, a life of peace, Chaim Shel Tova, of goodness, Chaim Shel Bracha, of blessing, Shel Parnasa, Chaim Shel Chilutz Atzomas, of good health, Chaim Sheyesh B'hem Yiras Chet, Chaim She'en B'hem Busha Chlima, no embarrassment, Chaim Shel Eisha V'chavod, a life of wealth and of honor, Chaim Shetivon Avas Torah V'Yiras Shamayim, Chaim Shetimale Lanu Es Kol Mishalis Lebeinu L'Tova. Now that is a Gemara in Brachos, and the Gemara, as I said, says that Rav would say this at the end of his Shemona Esrei. He would add that little prayer. Now, based on that, we take that Nusach HaTfilah and we say it on the Mevorach HaChodesh when we bless the upcoming month. Now, the Nusach is as follows, and it's slightly different, and let's look at the Nusach because there is a particular problem that I want to address. The Nusach we use in Mevorach HaChodesh is this: Chaim sheyesh bo yiras shamayim v'yiras chet. We daven that we should have a life, the month ahead should involve a life which has yiras shamayim, we have fear of heaven, v'yiras chet, and fear of sin, we shouldn't sin. Chaim she'en bo busha chlima, a life without any upset and embarrassment. Chaim shel eisha v'chavod, a life of wealth and of honor. Chaim she'tebonu avas haTorah v'yiras shamayim, a life where we love Torah and we have Yiras Shamayim. Chaim shemalo meshalis lebeinu l'tova mein sela, where Hashem fulfills our deep desires l'tova. The difficulty is, if you note carefully, that we daven for Yiras Shamayim twice. Chaim sheish ben Yiras Shamayim v'yiras chet, Chaim she'ein ben busha chlima, Chaim sheish v'chavod, Chaim she'tiponu avas Torah v'yiras Shamayim. So we daven for Yiras Shamayim twice in the tefillah of Mevorach HaChodesh. Why? So 3 answers to answer this question. Rabbi Gurvitz, the late Rosh Hashiva of Gateshead, Lav Mechaim Mechaim, the father of the current Rosh Hashiva, Bavram Gurvitz, would say the following: Yiras Shamayim, which is derived from studying Torah, is a different type of Yiras Shamayim. So therefore there are 2 levels. Chaim sheyesh ben Yiras Shamayim v'yiras chet is level 1, and then we continue Chaim shem ben busha chlima, Chaim shel v'chavod, Chaim shebanu avas haTorah v'yiras Shamayim. A person through learning Torah actually gets a heightened level of Yiras Shamayim. So we daven for Yiras Shamayim, and then we daven for Avas HaTorah, and then we daven for the higher form of Yiras Shamayim, which is loftier because of it's derived from Avas HaTorah, from learning Torah. That's one answer. Reb Nachman Landinsky, who was the Rav in Gateshead many decades ago, would say the following. He would say, the first time is Chaim sheyesh bohem Yiras Shamayim, and the second time is Chaim shetehei bonu. What's the difference? The second time is we're internalizing the Yiras Shamayim. The first time is Chaim sheyesh bohem Yiras Shamayim. We should live a life where there's Yiras Shamayim, but then we ask for a higher level of Yiras Shamayim, Chaim shetehei bonu. We should internalize that Yiras Shamayim. Beautiful. A third answer says, as it were, b'derech tzachas, like a lighter interpretation, is this. This was Reb Shammai Zahn, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Sunderland Yeshiva. He would say the following: once you mention money, Eisha v'chavod, then it's necessary to repeat the request of Yiras Shamayim. Once there's an exposure to money, then sometimes that confuses us, that sullies our perspective. And therefore we say, Chaim sheish ben Yiras Shamayim v'yiras chet. We daven for that. We make reference to Chaim shel Eisha v'chavod, and therefore, Nachamol, we've got to daven again for Yiras Shamayim, because we've been exposed, as it were, to Eisha v'chavod, and therefore we need to repeat that request for Yiras Shamayim. So 3 interpretations of why we say Yiras Shamayim a second time. We then move on and say, Chaverim Kol Yisrael, Misha also nisim laveseinu v'gal asom yavdus l'cheirus, hu yigal isanu b'karov. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should redeem us soon. V'yikabetz nidocheinu me'arba kanfos haaretz, and He should gather up the sort of the scattering of the Jewish people all over the world. Chaverim Kol Yisrael v'noimar amen, and all the Jewish people are chaverim. And what does that mean? What are we saying over there? So the Rambam, interestingly, in Sanhedrin, in Pirush Mishnayos, in the first parak in Mishnah Gimel, says the following. This is the bottom box of the page. Va'ani sovu, She'im tiyeh haskoma mikol hatalmidim v'chachomim. Limnois ish b'yeshiva. If there is consensus amongst the Jewish world to appoint somebody as the head, the chief rabbi of the Jewish people, and so long as it's in Eretz Yisrael, it's the majority, it's the appointment of the Talmidei Chachomim in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rambam famously says that it's possible to reinstitute the whole concept of smicha. Now's not the time, but this is a major statement which has sort of in history, in Jewish history of the last 1,000 years, has had a lot of airtime. How so? Well, we know that there's a concept of smicha. Smicha is where you become a rav. How do you do it? Well, traditionally nowadays, you learn various sections of Shulchan Aruch. Traditionally, you learn Yeridea, of Bas V'Cholov, and Taruvus, and Melicha, and maybe some Hilchas Shabbos, and Hilchas Nida, whatever else you learn. And then you're tested, and you get a faher, and if you pass, you get Smicha Yeri Yera. That's what Smicha is nowadays. But that's a far cry from Smicha of old. Smicha of old is you had a Rabbi, who himself was Musmach, and he would put his hands on your head like smicha means. Smicha means to rest, like you do with a carbon. So he would put your hands on your head and he would give you smicha, which means that he would give you the same idea, the role, the status of a rav. But it goes back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to Yeshua and then it was passed down. There was that chain. But the chain got broken. Says the Rambam, it's possible to reinstitute the whole process of smicha, that if there is consensus amongst the Talmidei Chachomim in Eretz Yisrael, you can do that. And there's been various attempts to do that over the generations. At the time of the Beis Yosef, of Yosef Cairo, it did not succeed. There was times more recently to reinstitute it. But that's for another time. But the point is, there is a tefillah for consensus to appoint the head of the Sanhedrin, to renew the whole smicha process. And that will be the prelude for Geula. And therefore, perhaps what we're saying over here is this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done tremendous chesed and miracles in the past with us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should redeem us again. Why do you need Chaverim Kol Yisrael? You need Chaverim Kol Yisrael because if you've got achdus, you've got consensus to appoint the head of the Sanhedrin, like the Rambam says, then you will be in a position to renew the smicha process, and that will be a prelude to the Geula. And Dafka this month, the month of Nisan, which is an auspicious month for Geula, as the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, B'Nisan Ligalu, B'Nisan Asidin Ligal, that we were redeemed in Nisan, we will please God be redeemed again in Nisan. And therefore, it's an auspicious month in particular for Rosh Chodesh Nisan to daven Chaverim Kol Yisrael, that there should be that consensus to appoint the head of the Sanhedrin to renew the smicha process, and therefore that will be the prelude to the Geula. So let's just review the 4 ideas that we've said on Parshas Pekudei. Number 1, why does it say Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdos? That very beautiful idea of Rabbi David Jungreis, that the Mishkan is Eidos, the Mishkan itself is testimony, i.e., testimony that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us and His Shekhinah resides amongst the Jewish people. Because the question, as we've discussed before, the clash between the Gemara in Yuma and the Gemara in Basra, when they came into the Heichal, the Kruvim were embracing, that itself was a sign of divine love for Klal Yisrael. That at the time of the Churban, when we were not doing the Ratzon Hashem, the Kruvim should have been faced away from each other, and yet they were embracing. That at that moment in time, it was a sign that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, yes, I know I'm displeased with you, and the Kruvim till now have been facing away from each other, but I'm going to destroy the Eitzim and the Avonim, the bricks and the sticks and the stones, and not you. That itself is a sign of divine pleasure, and that's what the Mishkan HaEdos means. The Mishkan HaEdos means that the Mishkan itself is Eidos of the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as per the Pasuk in Shir Hashirim, etc., etc. Then we have Rizal Sorotskin. How come there was an accounting when it came to the Mishkan, but not for less noble collections such as the Egel? The Teretz says that the Pinteliyid, that the Jew deep down wants to make, he knows that giving to a good cause is such a zechus for him, and therefore he wants to make sure that every single penny he gave was used for a good purpose. Mashenke in the Egel, deep down he's less concerned about that. On the contrary, he prefers it not to be used well, and therefore he does not demand a reckoning. The third idea we said was the idea of Moshe Feinstein, that ultimately Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan Eidos Asher Tziva Hashem, is a lesson for all of us. It's not just something that happened all those years ago with Moshe Rabbeinu, but is a demand on all of us that we have to do a reckoning from time to time of how we're using our time, our resources, our money, our opportunities. Are we using them in the most productive way possible? And then lastly, Shabbos Mevarchin, based on the nusach of the Gemara in Brachos with regard to Rav's own personal tefillah after Shemoneh Esrei, we've borrowed that tefillah to use every Mevarchin HaChodesh. Why do we daven for Yiras Shamayim twice? We gave 3 answers, because Yiras Shamayim the second time is referred to after requesting Avos HaTorah, and Yiras Shamayim derived from studying Torah is greater, and therefore it's a higher level of Yiras Shamayim. Reb Nachman Landinsky noted there's a difference between Chaim Sheyesh Bo and Yiras Shamayim and Chaim Shetei Bonu. The first one is an external one. There should be a life of Yiras Shamayim. The second higher level is Chaim Shetei Bonu, that we should internalize that Yiras Shamayim. And the third one, Rav Shammai Tzam would say that after mentioning Oishev V'Chovod, wealth, it's necessary to repeat the request. And then that very beautiful insight, who I may have heard it from Reb Chaim Perlman here of London, but I forget, why is it we say Chaverim Kol Yisrael? Perhaps the idea is, like the Rambam says, that if there is consensus amongst the Jewish people, the Talmidei Chachomim in Eretz Yisrael, we can actually appoint the head of the Sanhedrin to renew the smicha process, which ultimately is a prelude to the Geula. And we do that every Rosh Chodesh. And I just noted that this month, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, is a very auspicious month to do it in, because B'Nisan Nigalu, B'Nisan Asidim Nigal, in the month of Nisan we were redeemed, the Mitzvah Hashem La'osid, please God, it should be this month, it should be very soon, that B'Nisan Asidim Nigal, the Mitzvah Hashem HaShekurish Baruch Hu should bless all of Klal Yisrael, Befrat, in Eretz Yisrael, and we should have Besuras Tovas and Simchas one from each other.